Mr. Program Director, Excellencies, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, friends. We are here today to discuss the applicability of international humanitarian law in Western Sahara. This is particularly appropriate given the tragic passing, exactly 1 week ago today, of Mohammed Al-Ayubi, a Sahrawi human rights activist who died from injuries sustained as a result of torture in custody. Mr. Program Director, I humbly request that we all stand for a minute's silence for Mohammed Al-Ayubi and all Sahrawi dead in this conflict. Thank you. Program Director, in our understanding, international humanitarian law has two streams, namely the law of The Hague and the law of Geneva. The former pertains to the duties and conduct of belligerents during war. The latter pertains to the treatment of civilians during armed conflict. It is this that concerns us today. We need to recall some basic rules of international humanitarian law. It states, for example, that persons not taking part in hostilities shall be protected in all circumstances, that the wounded and the sick shall be cared for and protected by the party which has them in its power, and that no one shall be subjected to torture or to cruel, inhuman, or degrading treatment or punishment. One of the principles of international humanitarian law is that civilians be treated humanely at all times and are entitled to respect for their physical and mental integrity, their honor, family rights, religious convictions and practices, as well as their manners and customs. This principle has been affirmed by the International Committee of the Red Cross and Red Crescent as a norm of customary international law. Notwithstanding these rules and principles, we are continually confronted with reports cataloging the repression of protest action within the occupied territory, the prosecution of activists calling for Sahrawi self-determination or reporting on human rights violations, the use of excessive force against Sahrawi protesters, the restrictions of the right to peaceful assembly, the holding of protesters in so-called preventive detention for long periods, and torture of those in detention. Program Director, Mohammed Al-Ayubi, to whom I referred earlier, was tortured in prison. He was originally detained on 8 November 2010 when the Gdem Izik protest camp was dismantled by the military of the occupying power. He was tortured through beatings, sleep deprivation, and cigarette burns on his body. He was sexually abused, choked, and held in solitary confinement. He was hospitalized in a critical condition for 3 months. In 2013, he was sentenced to 20 years in prison based on confessions extracted under torture in a trial that was described as unfair by various NGOs and international observers. Conditions related to his torture included diabetes, kidney failure, hepatitis, and a permanently dislocated shoulder. This situation directly contradicts international human rights law and international humanitarian law. Program Director, in addition to this case, and the many like it, other serious violations of international humanitarian law include population transfers into the occupied territory, the plundering of the natural resources of Western Sahara, and the dispersion of Sahrawi prisoners in detention centers hundreds of kilometers from their families. In this light, South Africa remains unwavering in its support for the holding of a referendum on self-determination for the Sahrawi people. We shall continue to offer concrete support and solidarity for the programs of the Polisario Front. We will continue to share our experiences in the peaceful settlement of conflict, because any further delay in finding a lasting solution has consequences for peace and security on the African continent. We believe that the readmission of the Kingdom of Morocco to the African Union presents us with an opportunity to resolve the suffering of the Sahrawi people. We therefore echo the decision of the Assembly of the African Union taken during its 30th ordinary session held in Addis Ababa, Ethiopia from 28 to 29 January 2018, calling on the two member states, and I quote, to engage without preconditions in direct and serious talks facilitated by the AU and the UN for the holding of a free and fair referendum for the people of Western Sahara, close quote, and calling on the two parties, quote, to fully cooperate with the AU High Representative for Western Sahara, former President Joaquim Chissano of Mozambique, and the personal envoy of the UN Secretary General, Mr. Horst Kohler, close quote. In conclusion, Program Director, this year we celebrate the birth centenary of Nelson Mandela, a freedom fighter who was the embodiment of human rights. In his statement from the dock at the opening of the defense case in the Pretoria Supreme Court on 20 April 1964, he stated, and I quote, "During my lifetime, I have dedicated myself to this struggle of the African people. I have fought against white domination, and I have fought against black domination. I have cherished the ideal of a democratic and free society in which all persons live together in harmony and with equal opportunities. It is an ideal which I hope to live for and to achieve, but if needs be, it is an ideal for which I am prepared to die." 34 years later, in his final speech to the General Assembly as President of South Africa on 21 September 1998, Nelson Mandela stated, and I quote, "We look forward to the resolution of the outstanding issues of Western Sahara and East Timor, convinced that it is possible to take these matters off the world agenda on the basis of settlements that meet the interests of all the persons concerned," close quote. Let us therefore work with renewed commitment and vigor to bring violations of international humanitarian law in Western Sahara to an end. Let us work to relieve the suffering of the Sahrawi people and restore their human dignity. And let us take decisive steps to close the chapter on this last vestige of occupation and colonialism on the African continent. Thank you for listening to me.
I thank you.